The United States has a long history of brutal punishments. From public hangings to horrific witch trials, cruelty has often been justified in the name of justice, order, or security. This is the brutal, shocking reality of America's most infamous punishments. Firstly, we have the iron collar, an ancient device used to restrain and control slaves that was later adopted by the United States. First used in ancient Rome, iron collars were placed around the necks of criminals and slaves to label them as unfree or as a form of prolonged torture. In Roman times, the collars of enslaved people would often be inscribed with the details of owners in case their slaves escaped. In the 17th to 19th centuries, slavers in North America used similar iron collars to prevent runaways and punish disobedient enslaved people. These collars, sometimes spiked or weighted, inflicted pain and served as a symbol of control. While the U.S. banned participation in the transatlantic slave trade in 1808, slavery itself continued until 1865, and such brutal restraints remained in use. Next up, we have the iron bit, a brutal and oppressive punishment used primarily in the southern United States during the era of slavery. It was designed to silence and restrain enslaved individuals, particularly when they were deemed rebellious or disobedient. The device was essentially a metal muzzle or gag that would be forced into the mouth of the slave, preventing them from speaking or crying out. This punishment was often used on slaves who resisted orders, attempted to escape, or were caught in acts of defiance. The device is also recorded as being useful for slave owners to prevent escape, as they were useful for slowing down slaves who attempted to escape by running through the woods. The practice of gagging slaves was documented in slave narratives and publications from the 1700s until the Civil War. These accounts describe its use as a form of psychological and physical torture, making it one of the many brutal tools used to maintain control and suppress dissent among enslaved populations. Waterboarding has a long and controversial history, both globally and within the United States, where it has been used as an interrogation technique. While the exact origins of the practice are unclear, it can be traced back to at least the 16th century, when Spanish inquisitors used a form of it to extract confessions from suspected heretics. The practice was also notably used during the Vietnam War by U.S. forces against suspected Viet Cong prisoners, though it remained largely under the radar in terms of public awareness. It wasn't until the War on Terror in the early 2000s that waterboarding resurfaced in the public eye on a large scale. Under the George W. Bush administration, the U.S. government authorized its use on terrorist suspects. The practice involves pouring water over a captive's face, blocking their breathing passages and creating a sensation of drowning. While water is usually poured intermittently to avoid death, continuous pouring can lead to asphyxiation. The practice causes extreme pain, lung damage, brain injury from oxygen deprivation, physical injuries caused by struggling, and lasting psychological trauma, with effects that can persist for months or even years. Despite being labeled by many as a form of torture, the U.S. government at the time justified waterboarding as a harsh interrogation technique, arguing that it was necessary for obtaining critical intelligence from detainees. However, following widespread public outcry and accusations of violating international human rights law, waterboarding was banned in 2009 under President Barack Obama, though debates over its legality and morality continue to this day. Tarring and feathering was a brutal and humiliating punishment, often used as a political or social tool in colonial America. The practice involved covering an individual with hot tar and then throwing feathers over them, leaving the victim covered in a sticky, uncomfortable mess. Originating in medieval Europe, the punishment became more widespread in the American colonies during the 18th century, particularly in response to political dissent or perceived betrayal. The primary targets were tax collectors and anyone seen as supporting British authority during the period leading up to and during the American Revolution. For example, those who supported British taxation or enforced unpopular laws were commonly victims of this gruesome punishment. While the tar and feathers themselves were extremely painful, the real agony came from being paraded through town in front of jeering crowds, enduring public humiliation, and the physical discomfort of the sticky substance that could burn the skin. Beyond its use as a form of protest, tarring and feathering served as a reminder of the power of public opinion in early colonial America. Though rarely life-threatening, the pain and degradation associated with the punishment made it a deeply traumatic experience for those on the receiving end. The pillory was a wooden frame with holes for securing the head and hands of criminals in a public setting as a humiliating punishment. It was a notorious punishment in colonial America designed to restrain, humiliate, and physically punish offenders in full view of the public. Originating in medieval Europe, it soon became a staple of justice in the American colonies, particularly under Puritan rule. In places like the Massachusetts Bay Colony, It was not just a punishment for criminals, but a means of enforcing religious and intellectual conformity on the entire community. A wide range of offenses could land someone in the pillory, from blasphemy, perjury, and fraud to more minor crimes like public drunkenness or profanity. Those who found themselves locked in the wooden frame often faced more than just hours of public humiliation. They were frequently subjected to flagellation while restrained, effectively turning the pillory into a whipping post. Additionally, some offenders suffered permanent mutilation, such as branding or the cropping of ears, as was the case with John Bastwick, who had his ears cut off for criticizing the Church of England. Beyond physical pain, the social aspect of the punishment was severe. Spectators were encouraged to mock, jeer, and even pelt the punished with rotten food, mud, or stones, making the experience deeply degrading. While its use declined over time, it remained a symbol of harsh colonial justice and the power of public shaming in maintaining order. The ducking stool was a punishment imported from medieval England, where it was used from at least the 14th century to punish members of society deemed troublesome. Likely primarily used as a punishment for women, the ducking chair was a punishment for those found guilty of crimes like gossip, arguing with neighbors, public nuisance, or witchcraft. This wooden chair, attached to a long beam or lever, was designed to repeatedly submerge the accused in water, serving both as a form of public humiliation and physical torment. In colonial America, ducking stools were primarily used in Puritan and English settlements, where they reinforced strict religious gender roles and moral discipline. Unlike execution or corporal punishment, the ducking stool relied on public spectacle, with crowds gathering to witness the punishment. In some cases, repeated dunking could lead to hypothermia, drowning, or suffocation, making it a potentially deadly ordeal. The United States is indeed notable for its early and pioneering use of electricity in the context of punishment, particularly with the introduction of the electric chair. First used in 1890 in New York, the electric chair was designed as a more humane alternative to hanging, yet it quickly became associated with cruelty. It uses high-voltage electrical currents to cause rapid brain and heart failure, a method that still sparks controversy over its effectiveness and ethics. While not the first to use electricity for punishment, the U.S. led the way in using it as a legal method of execution, which spread to other countries in the early 20th century. Over time, the electric chair became a symbol of execution in the U.S., even though it's been increasingly replaced by lethal injection in modern times. In more recent years, electricity has been used not only as a form of execution, but also as a means of torture, punishment, and control, particularly in the context of law enforcement and military operations. One of the most common uses of electricity in modern punishment has been through the application of electroshock weapons, such as tasers, which are widely used by police forces across the U.S. to incapacitate individuals. While these devices are presented as a non-lethal means of subduing suspects, their potential for abuse and injury has been well documented, and instances of their use resulting in death or severe injury have raised significant concerns. Additionally, electroshock therapy has been used in psychiatric settings to treat mental illnesses, though its use has been heavily debated. Today, electroshock therapy is still sometimes used to treat severe depression, bipolar disorder, and other mental health conditions when other treatments fail. It involves brief electrical pulses to the brain to trigger a controlled seizure, helping alleviate symptoms. ECT became widely used in the U.S. starting in the 1940s and 50s. In some cases, it was overused or misused as a form of control, sometimes with little regard for patient consent. Today, it's more regulated and used as a last resort for specific conditions. Despite changes to America's legal procedures in recent decades, the electric chair remains an authorized method of execution in 9 states. Thanks for watching. If you found these brutal punishments in U.S. history as shocking as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more deep dives into the darker side of justice. Let us know in the comments which punishment shocked you the most.